The city of Varel had once been called the Pearl of the Sands. Before the famines, before the wind turned dry and the river shrank to a ribbon of dust. Before the desert swallowed its trade roads and the laughter of children became a memory, Varel had been beautiful. Its spires reached high into blue skies. Its markets hummed with the perfume of spices and song. And its people, proud, clever, sun-kissed, believed the city could never fall. But nothing golden lasts forever, and even pearls dissolve under pressure. It began with the drought. 3 years without real rain. The fountains dried first, then the wells, then the faith of the people. Crops withered in the fields like forgotten prayers. The vineyards turned to brittle claws, and the orchards, once thick with citrus and stone fruit, stood gray and skeletal. Livestock dropped dead in their pens, their ribs like claws reaching for mercy. The wind blew harder each season, scouring the streets and scratching away at paint and patience alike. The rich hoarded what water they could, sealing off their estates behind bronze gates while the poor scraped dew from cracked stones. Hunger soon followed, slow and creeping at first, then clawing and undeniable. By the time the foreign caravans arrived, the Council of Varel, a circle of aging men with gold-trimmed robes and mouths to use to luxury, had grown desperate. The city had no coin left, no crops to trade, no metals to mine. But they had daughters. At first it was unspoken, a whisper in the shadows of the grand hall, then a vote, then a decree. To ensure the prosperity of Varel, the city shall offer its finest daughters to those who may provide relief. The phrasing was legal, polished, dressed in robes of sacrifice and salvation. But everyone knew what it meant. Daughters would be sold. Beauty would be priced, and the city would survive on their backs. The first auction was quiet. Only a few foreign buyers came, mostly desert merchants with gold teeth and veiled eyes. 5 girls stood trembling on the marble steps of the council hall, dressed in pale silks, their faces powdered to hide their terror. The highest bidder took the tallest. The next claimed the one with the darkest eyes. One girl tried to run. She was caught and sold for half price. The councilman toasted that night with imported wine, and the food that arrived days later from the southern caravans filled the royal stores, not the streets. By the third auction, the practice had become routine. Daughters of noble houses were disguised as commoners to avoid shame. Soldiers were stationed at every corner, ensuring compliance. Children were pulled from kitchens, from classrooms, from temples. The age dropped. 14, 13, some younger. It didn't matter. If a girl had hips that hinted at fertility, she was eligible. Mothers cried in silence. Fathers drank in shame. The ones who resisted were marked, their homes raided, their sons drafted into endless wars beyond the dunes. And the city watched, year after year, as its future was stripped away and packaged in silk for men, whose names no one dared ask. But not all girls were taken. Hidden behind the scorched walls of an old chapel, far from the reach of the guards and the cruel laughter of the council hall, sat a girl they called Ruin. She was 17 and had not been chosen, not because she was too young or too ill, but because no one wanted her. Once, long ago, Ruin had been considered beautiful. She had coppery hair that caught the sun and eyes like riverstone, gray with flecks of green. Her mother had called her Lightbringer, a name from the old tongue, long forgotten. But the fever had taken her beauty. It came one summer like a sandstorm, fierce, fast, and burning. It devoured the children in the lower districts, leaving those who survived shivering and strange. Ruin had survived, but her hair fell in clumps until only smooth scalp remained. Her eyebrows vanished, her skin turned pale and waxen. She became ghostly. Foreign. Then came the soldiers. When the food riots began, after the third false harvest and the council's refusal to distribute the stores, they sent men with knives and iron rods into the poorer quarters. Ruin, then just 15, was caught outside the chapel carrying water. They didn't care that she was sick. They didn't care that she screamed. When it was done, she didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. Her mother had died. Weeks before, her father had vanished in the protests. And Ruin, bald, bruised, and broken, was invisible. For 2 years, she had lived in the hollow of the burned chapel, where the paint on the saints had peeled, and the roof leaked stars. She scavenged bread crusts and stole from the council's refuse carts. Sometimes an old monk left a flask of water by the altar. Once, a child threw a red apple through the broken window. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. But, mostly, she was alone. No one touched her. No one saw her. They thought she was cursed, but now she was pregnant. The child had come from that awful night. A consequence, a curse, but also something else. It moved inside her like fire and ice. She did not hate it. She spoke to it in the mornings, whispered lullabies into the swell of her belly, and imagined what it might become, girl or boy, soft-eyed or sharp. It was hers. The only thing in the city she could claim as her own. The only thing they hadn't taken. On the day of the final auction, Varel was strangely quiet. All the girls had been gathered, hundreds lined up in the great courtyard, their hair combed, their lips painted, their names recorded in gold script. There were no more children left to take. The council, bloated with pride, called it the Great Offering. The buyers came in carriages with jeweled wheels and banners of foreign lands. Drums echoed through the city, bells tolled, and the people, too tired to protest and too starved to care, watched their daughters vanish one by one. But not Ruin. She sat in the chapel with her legs tucked beneath her and her fingers tracing the cracked lines of an old mosaic. Her belly kicked, she smiled. She could hear the drums but felt no fear. She had not been taken, she had not been chosen. She was not part of their story. She was writing her own. That evening, after the last girl had been sold and the last bell had tolled, the sky turned the color of ash. A wind rose from the east, sharp and full of grit. The city, thinking itself saved, celebrated in flickering light. Music played in the merchant halls, and wine flowed for the wealthy. But in the chapel, beneath the shattered dome, Ruin lit a single candle and placed it beside her stomach. She did not know why. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps it was ritual, or perhaps, in the silent dark, with nothing left but breath and blood, and the child within her, she knew that the city's story was not yet finished. When dawn broke over Varel, the light did not arrive gently. It seared through the dust-choked skies with the cruel brilliance of a blade, casting sharp angles across the ruins and making every jagged corner of the city seem more brittle than before. Ash clung to rooftops. The sand, ever restless, slipped through shutter cracks and whispered in the crevices of abandoned temples. The night had celebrated the Great Offering, but morning brought a sobering silence. The daughters were gone. The streets were empty, and for the first time in decades, there was no sound of laughter, no echo of youth. No one thought to check the chapel. Why would they? It was broken like everything else. That didn't turn profit or please men with desert coin. The stained glass had shattered long ago. The priests had been exiled or executed for refusing to bless the auctions, and the statues of the saints stood decapitated, their heads rolled like stones down the temple steps. Holiness had no place in a city that traded flesh for water. And yet, in the heart of that hollowed place, Ruin stirred. She had not slept much. The child moved more now. Each shift felt like a reminder, not just of life, but of resistance. It grew, despite the hunger, it turned and kicked, despite the despair. And Ruin, frail, bald, hollow-eyed, grew more alert with each sunrise. Something inside her had begun to awaken. She stood slowly, pressing her hand to the wall as the weight of her belly threatened her balance. Her bones ached, but she moved with purpose. She had found an old jar buried beneath the altar weeks before, one that once held sacred oil, and now she used it to collect rainwater from a broken pipe that trickled, ever so faintly, during the colder dawns. Today, there was barely a sip, but she took it, whispered a thank you to the ceiling, and drank slowly, sharing drops with the fig leaves she had started growing in clay pots, scavenged from the market ruins. Outside, the city was beginning to stir. Councilmen bloated from their indulgence the night before, stumbled through marble halls, draped in silks that no longer fit. Their mouths were stained with wine, and their minds fogged with the satisfaction of having sold the last of the city's innocence. They did not worry about tomorrow. They had been paid. But not all in the city were content. Among the masses, grief had turned to rage. Fathers wept openly now. Mothers tore their garments. Older brothers sharpened knives in alleys, whispering of rebellion. A few dared scratch messages on stone walls. Our daughters are not yours. One boy was caught smearing pitch over the council's banners. They burned him alive by noon. The city choked on the smell. Meanwhile, Ruin stepped out into the light. She wore a robe patched from curtains and stained with soot, her feet wrapped in strips of old tunic. Her head gleamed beneath the sun, catching the light like a blade. To the guards who still patrolled, she looked like a wraith, something half dead and half mad. They paid her no mind. She had passed beneath their notice so long ago. She was less than a beggar. She was a shadow. She walked with a strange calmness toward the western edge of the city. There, behind a broken wall and a long-forgotten fountain, was a hidden corner of soil. It wasn't much, just a pocket of earth shielded from the worst of the wind. Ruin had been tending it in secret, planting what seeds she could barter from old apothecaries and forgotten storerooms. Her garden was barely alive, a single sprig of thyme, a few curling radish tops, and the stubborn fig sapling, but it was hers. She knelt and whispered to the roots. "Grow," she said. "Please, grow." Behind her, footsteps crunched. She turned sharply, hand moving to her belly protectively. A boy, no older than 10, stood with wide eyes, holding out a dented flask. He didn't speak, but he extended it, trembled, and ran. Ruin unscrewed the top and sniffed. Water clean. She didn't know who he was. Perhaps one of the many orphans left behind when his sister was taken. Perhaps a spy sent to watch her. Perhaps a sign. Either way, she drank. The child within her seemed to settle, as if calmed by the coolness that now filled her veins. She closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in years, something like peace. That night, a storm brewed. Not of rain, no, the gods hadn't cried for Varel in years, but of men, The lower quarter had gathered. Word had spread that the council would host another feast, a final celebration of their triumph. But the people had begun to whisper other names for it. The feast of shame, the banquet of bone. Ruin heard the rumors while trading dried herbs in a back alley for a slice of bread. The people were tired of selling their daughters and burying their sons. They wanted blood, and yet, Ruin didn't join them. She returned to the chapel. She lit her candle. She placed it again by her belly and listened to the wind howl through the cracks in the dome. Her body was changing. Her back ached, her breath shortened. The time was near. The child was coming, but so was something else. The next morning, smoke blackened the sky. The palace was burning. The screams echoed from the high walls. Rebels had stormed the banquet. They poured molten tar into goblets. They dragged councilmen into the square and shaved their heads as the daughters had been shorn. But vengeance, once tasted, demanded more. The mob swept through the city like fire, looting, stabbing, roaring. And in the middle of it all, Ruin went into labor, alone. In the chapel, beneath the shattered saints and scorched stars, she howled. Her voice, forgotten for so long, broke from her throat like thunder. No one heard, no one came. Her hands clawed at stone. Blood smeared the floor. Hours passed, and then silence, followed by a cry. Small, fragile, alive, Ruin cradled the child, a girl in trembling arms. The babe was red and wrinkled, with hair the color of the desert sky at dusk. Her eyes opened slowly, wide and dark, and Ruin felt something shift inside her. Not pain, not fear, power. She had made life in a city built on death. She had brought light where even saints had gone dark. The people could burn their palaces, they could kill their kings, but Ruin had done something they never could. She had created a future. As the city tore itself apart, Ruin wrapped the child in the last piece of silk she had, a scrap of her mother's wedding veil, and whispered into the baby's ear, "You are the daughter they forgot, the one they didn't get to sell. You are mine, and you will never belong to them." The wind rose again, but this time it didn't bring despair. It carried a scent, faint, sweet, impossible. Ruin had thought the worst was behind her. She had given birth alone, carved life from the jaws of decay, and lived to tell no one about it. In the chapel where saints had been silenced and hope had been ground to dust beneath boothdeals, she had screamed her daughter into the world, and for a moment, a pure moment, there had been stillness. The kind of stillness that hangs before dawn, that hush after a storm, that breath before a city's heart starts beating again. But peace in Varel was always borrowed, and debts always came due. Her child, whom she named Selah, after the old word for breath of rain, was born into a city tearing itself apart. The mob that had overthrown the council had not laid foundations for peace. They had burned, they had broken, but they had not rebuilt. And soon, after the palaces were turned to ashes and the storehouses raided, hunger came like a second war. Law vanished. Power shifted to whoever held the most blades. Merchant clans rose. Thieves carved out new territories. Water became more precious than gold, and women, especially young ones, once again became the city's darkest currency. But not Saela. No one knew she existed. No one dared look into the ruins of the old chapel, which had since earned a nickname among the frightened, the bleeding mouth. They said ghosts screamed from its cracked dome at night, that a bald witch, with eyes like glowing coals, haunted it, that blood dripped from the altar and cursed anyone who lingered. These stories, crafted from fear and superstition, protected Ruin more than any wall could. She encouraged the rumors in small ways, leaving symbols scrawled in ash on stones, hanging bits of cloth from the broken arches. It kept the curious away. It kept Selah safe. Ruin raised her in shadows. By day, she scavenged food and water. By night, she taught the girl to speak with her hands, not because Selah couldn't talk, but because sound drew predators. She taught her to read, using pages torn from hymnals and broken tablets. She taught her how to walk without making noise, how to sleep with one ear open, how to read the wind. The child grew thin but strong. Her eyes were too wise for her age. She asked few questions, and Ruin, in turn, gave few answers. All she ever said was, "The world is not ready for you, my heart, but you must be ready for it." Selah's hair grew dark and long, but Ruin kept it shaved, even when the girl cried. She could not afford for anyone to see her and wonder if she was young enough to sell. Bald girls were overlooked. Sick girls were passed over. Better a daughter that the world thought broken than a daughter it wanted to buy. Still, the world crept in on Selah's 5th birthday, celebrated with a wild plum and a single note sung aloud. Ruin found a trader in the southern quarter selling dolls made of corn husk. It was foolish to risk barter for something so useless, but she did it anyway. She offered herbs and a bit of cloth. The trader, a haggard woman with 7 missing teeth, sniffed and handed over the doll. "Strange," she muttered. "You buy for someone else's child." Ruin froze. "What do you mean? You've no breasts, no milk scent, but your eyes are wild like a mother wolf's. I've seen them before. Don't worry," the woman added. "I don't care who you hide. I sold my own daughter to the lords 10 winters ago. Never got over it. If I had kept her, maybe I'd look like you too." Ruin didn't answer. She took the doll and vanished into the alley. That night, she gave it to Selah with shaking hands. The child squealed with delight, the first sound of pure joy Ruin had ever heard her make. The doll became a sister, a protector, a confidant. Selah named it Loom, after a word she had read scratched into the old stone, illumination. But Selah's joy couldn't stay secret forever. On the eve of her 7th year, Selah followed Ruin. She was not supposed to. Ruin always left her in a small hiding nook beneath the broken confessional, covered in blankets and guarded by traps and tricks. But the girl had grown curious. She wanted to know what lay beyond the chapel walls. So she followed, silent as breath, through the alleys and to the old fountain garden. There, she watched as her mother traded herbs with a woman in a veil. She saw how her mother bowed slightly, how she whispered. She saw other children, ragged, thin, clustered nearby, not with mothers, but buyers. She did not understand, and then one of the men saw her. He was cloaked in gray. Tall, thin as a reed, with fingers that curled like spiders. His eyes locked on Sailor's, and something in him changed. He whispered something to the others. By the time Ruin returned to the chapel that evening, her daughter was already hiding again, pale, shaken, silent. She didn't speak for 3 days. Ruin knew something had happened. She held her, sang to her, danced like a fool to make her smile, and slowly, the child came back. But something had broken. Some innocence had cracked. From then on, Selah asked questions. Who am I? Why do I have no friends? Why do people look at me like I'm meat? Ruin had no lies left, so she told her the truth. You were born in a city that sold its soul, she said. They tried to sell every daughter, but they forgot one. They forgot you. And that is their greatest mistake. Selah didn't cry. She only asked one more question, then what will I become? And Ruin answered, something they cannot chain. But fate, like dust in Varel, finds every crack. One morning, years later, Ruin returned from the marketplace to find the chapel ransacked. The fig tree she had grown had been torn from its pot. The floor was smeared with muddy footprints, and Selah was gone. Only one thing remained, a scrap of her robe, torn and bloodied, pinned to the altar with a knife. Ruin screamed then, not with rage, but with a sound so deep it cracked her throat raw. It was the cry of a woman who had not wept in a decade. The cry of a mother who knew too well what happened to girls taken in Varel, especially ones that didn't look broken anymore. She had been careful. She had taught her daughter every secret, every rule. But she had made one mistake. She had made her too radiant. Selah, at 13, was no longer overlooked. Her eyes gleamed like polished onyx. Her posture was proud. Her silence, once a shield, had become a crown. Someone had seen her and decided she would fetch a price. But they had made their own mistake. They had taken the wrong girl, because Selah was not just a daughter. She was the last daughter, the one the city had missed. The one no chain could hold, and they had not counted on the fury of a mother who had carved life from rot. Ruin set fire to the chapel that night, not in grief, not in surrender, in message. The dome collapsed into the flames. The saints turned to smoke. The walls bled light into the sky. And from the heart of the blaze, Ruin stepped into the world, bald, bloodied, burned, holding a broken blade and walking with a limp. She had no plan, just a name, the gray cloak. She whispered it as she moved through the ruins, through the merchants' quarter, through the whore alleys and the bone markets. She left signs in ash and symbols in blood. And always she asked, where's the girl? With the eyes like fire, the city, at first, ignored her. Then they feared her. Then they closed their doors. And soon, they whispered a new name for her, the mother that burned. The city of Varel had never knelt to anyone. Not to kings, not to gods, not even to famine. But it would kneel to a mother. Not because she demanded it, but because she earned it in blood, fire, and a silence more terrifying than any scream. Rune's name disappeared. It was swallowed by the smoke she left behind, replaced by something bigger, something elemental. She became a story, a curse, a reckoning. The few who saw her and lived called her the mother that burned, and wherever her feet landed, the earth seemed to whisper her name. But she did not care for names. She cared for her daughter, and Varel. The city that thought it had sold every child was about to learn that it had overlooked its most dangerous one. Rune's hunt did not begin with an army. It began with a single truth. Men who steal daughters are cowards, and cowards talk. They whisper behind silks. They drink too much. They brag in brothels. They laugh at suffering. And in their laughter, they leave cracks. Ruin followed those cracks like rivers. She tracked the scent of iron in the air to a brothel masquerading as a tailor's den. She carved through the walls like wind through wheat, and when the tailor raised a hand, she broke his fingers, one by one, whispering, where's the girl with fire in her eyes? He said nothing, so she broke his teeth. Next. By the end of the night, she walked out with a name and a direction. House of Grey Thorns. The tailor had wept. They took her, they take many. She's just one. But Ruin was never just anything. And neither was her daughter. The House of Grey Thorns was not a house at all. It was a fortress built beneath the city, carved into the forgotten catacombs of Varel, where the bones of old kings lined the halls and the screams of the lost were muffled by 10 feet of dirt. It was a network of tunnels and vaults and cages, a black market for flesh and power, a place where names were erased and only prices mattered. They didn't expect a mother to come. They especially didn't expect her. By the time ruin reached its gates, the stories had already spread. Of a bald woman with eyes like a storm, and a blade carved from chapel stone, of a fire that consumed holy ground, of buyers found gutted in alleyways with only one word carved into their chests, Selah. She arrived not as a whisper, but a storm. 2 guards at the gate stood no chance. They didn't recognize her until it was too late, until she had slit one's throat with the jagged edge of a broken icon and shoved the other's face into a brazier until his eyes burst. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply stepped over them, barefoot, bleeding, and walked into the dark. Inside, the house tried to be clever. Hallways collapsed. Gas-filled chambers. Blades shot from the walls. She survived it all. Not because she was immune to pain, but because she welcomed it. Every cut was a prayer. Every burn was a memory. Every bruise was a promise. I will not leave without my daughter. And then, she found her Selah was not in a cage. She was not shackled. She sat at a table surrounded by buyers. Dressed in silk, painted in ash, she looked like a doll, but her eyes burned brighter than Ruin had ever seen. Not scared, not broken. Watching a test, Ruin realized they had tried to break her, and failed. The gray cloak himself sat across from her, no longer cloaked, no longer pretending. His fingers dripped with rings made of teeth. His smile was a dagger drawn slow. You must be the flame, he said as Ruin entered, the one they can't extinguish. Tell me, do you know how many daughters I've sold? How many mothers I've buried? Ruin said nothing. He continued, but you're special. You made me nervous, and that's rare, so I'll make you a bargain. Still, she said nothing. Your daughter for your life. Die here, quietly, and I'll raise her. She'll live in silk. She'll eat every night. I'll even let her keep your name for a while. Isn't that what mothers want? Ruin stepped forward. He stood, reaching for his blade, but Ruin was already moving. What followed was not a fight. It was judgment. The blade she carried, broken and dull, should not have been enough. But it was wielded by fury, by grief, by years of silence. She moved like smoke, struck like thunder. The gray cloak fell with a scream that echoed through the bones of kings. The other buyers fled. Not one stayed to help him, and when he fell, Ruin turned to Selah. For a moment, she was afraid. The girl did not move. She looked at this mother, this force of flame and ruin, and whispered, "Are you real?" Ruin sank to her knees. She opened her arms, and the child ran into them. They did not stay. The city above was shifting. Some had heard the story already. Some feared it. Others wanted to claim it. Ruin knew what came next. Attempts at worship, at control, at mythologizing what had never been meant for altars. So she walked away. With her daughter, no destination, just the open roads beyond the sand. But Varel remembered. Years passed. The house of gray thorns was buried. Those who had profited were exposed and dragged into the streets. And on the ruins of the chapel, someone built a garden. The fig tree, somehow, alive, grew again. Wild, tall, fruitful, and stories spread. Of a woman and her daughter who walked the coasts. Who helped the lost. Who left behind signs of protection and fire. They spoke in hand language. They stayed in ruins. They helped girls escape. And whenever someone tried to follow them, they vanished like smoke. Children in Varel played a game. Years later, they would shave their heads. They would dress in old robes. They would pretend to light candles and whisper to each other, "Who are you?" And the answer was always, "I am the one they forgot."